Hey guys, tonight we dive headfirst into deep myth-drenched waters literally. You're weightless now adrift. No phone signal. No deadlines. Just a hush of waves and the faint glow of bioluminescent plankton flickering around you like underwater fireflies. The sea stretches infinite beneath you, quiet and impossible. And somewhere in that blackness, they say, lies a city. A city that ruled the oceans, that worshipped strange gods, that vanished overnight. You know the name already, Atlantis. But let's be honest, you probably won't survive this. Not if you're expecting neat answers or perfectly preserved stone columns. This story's more slippery than an eel dipped in olive oil. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? I always love seeing where my fellow late-night wanderers are listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not in 2025 anymore. You're sitting in Athens. The year is somewhere around 360 BCE. The wine flows, the oil lamps flicker, and a man named Plato is talking. A lot. You lean forward. He's spinning a tale, a conversation actually between old philosophers. One of them starts describing a powerful civilization rich beyond reason, with concentric canals and gleaming temples dedicated to Poseidon. This place was everything Greece wished it could be: majestic, efficient, godlike. And then, the twist. With a thunderclap of divine fury, Atlantis falls. In a single day and night, it sinks beneath the sea, swallowed whole, like it never existed. You blink, everyone does. Because Plato isn't telling just any bedtime story he claims is true. This isn't just poetic metaphor, he says. This came from ancient Egyptian priests told to Solon, the wise Athenian lawmaker. Passed down like a secret family recipe, now served piping hot in two of Plato's dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. And in Critias, things get wild. He describes a city more detailed than most blueprints. Walls of orichalcum, whatever that is, horse racing arenas, aqueducts, even laws. You begin to wonder, was this guy writing historical fiction or laying out a conspiracy? Historians still argue whether Plato meant for us to believe any of it. Was he trying to make a point about hubris, a political allegory, or did he just get bored of Socratic method and say, screw it, let's drop a continent? But here's the thing, you're not just listening. You feel it. That image of a whole civilization wiped away by the sea clings to you, and it's clung to humanity ever since. A mainstream historical fact, Plato is literally the only original source of the Atlantis story. No earlier Greek texts mention it. Not Homer, not Hesiod, not even Herodotus with his encyclopedic travelogues. Just this one dramatic reveal dropped like a plot twist into philosophical discussions. And yet people have chased it like it was gospel. That's the power of myth, or maybe memory. Because fringe theory time, some believe Plato wasn't inventing, he was revealing. That his ancestors had known a seafaring empire. That Egypt did preserve records. That what he called Atlantis was just the Greek name for something even older, hidden under layers of sand, water, and denial. There's a part in Timaeus where the speaker claims Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Heracles, that's modern-day Gibraltar for the record, and was larger than Libya and Asia combined. You do the math. That's not a quaint island off Sicily. That's a continent. You pause, let that sink in. Literally. Now zoom out for a moment. Why does this story land so hard? Maybe it's because deep down you've always suspected something big is missing from the timeline. That modern civilization isn't the first. That our ancestors may have flown a little too close to the technological sun and burned. Of course, academics raise a skeptical eyebrow. No archaeological site has ever clearly matched Plato's Atlantis. No orichalcum bars found, no sunken temples with Poseidon statues. No conclusive, here it is moment. But then again, ancient Troy was once thought to be a myth too, until they found it buried under Hisarlik in Turkey, layer upon layer of rubble, war, and silence. So who's to say Atlantis isn't just waiting for the right pair of hands and a brush? You sit back in your seat, the hum of the engine, steady under your eyes, tracing the lines of the road or the stars above, depending on where you are. And the ocean stretches in your mind, vast, unknowable, and possibly hiding a truth too big for textbooks. The story of Atlantis doesn't end with Plato. In fact, it barely begins with him. Because once those words were spoken, that idea released into the world, it took on a life of its own, warping, spreading, mutating into maps, myths, and obsessions that would echo across centuries. And you're just getting started. You're still in the room with Plato. The oil lamps flicker, casting long shadows across marbled walls. But the wine's gone warm and everyone's gone quiet. You lean closer. Because now the old philosopher isn't just entertaining dinner guests, he's cracking open a puzzle box. And you've just taken the first piece. He calls it Cretius. Not a poem, not a myth, a dialogue. Supposedly historical. As factual as you telling someone what happened last Thursday, except what happened last Thursday was, well, an entire civilization sinking into the sea. You raise an eyebrow, and yet the detail is suspiciously rich. Plato doesn't just say Atlantis was big. He says Atlantis was larger than Libya and Asia combined. He doesn't just say they had buildings. He describes layers of concentric walls and moats, each ring in alternating colors of black, white, and red stone. The city center, a temple to Poseidon decked in silver ivory and glowing red metal called orichalcum. Horses, gymnasiums, sacred groves, hot and cold springs, it's all there described with obsessive, almost bureaucratic precision. You think no one makes this up just for fun? Not in the middle of a philosophical debate, or do they? Because mainstream scholars say hold your seahorses. Plato was a master dramatist. He used myths to make points to personify ideas. Atlantis, they argue, is just a cautionary tale about power and pride, an allegory warning Athens, don't get too big for your marble sandals. But fringe thinkers love a loophole. They point out that Plato insists this is a true story passed down from Solon, who got it from Egyptian priests in the city of Sais. And Solon wasn't just some drunk philosopher, he was a respected statesman and lawmaker, the kind of guy who doesn't traffic in bedtime fairy tales. Still, historians argue whether this chain of transmission is real or convenient fiction. Was Solon even in Egypt? Was the Egyptian history Plato refers to based on actual records or just a hazy travel tale dressed up for drama? But you know how stories work. You've told a few yourself. When someone includes too much detail, it's either because they're lying or because they can't forget. Let's test that. Close your eyes, not if you're driving, obviously. Picture Atlantis the way Plato did. You move through the city, the outer ring docks full of merchant ships, exotic goods being unloaded, ivory spices, golden birds from somewhere far south. Then a layer inward, white stone houses stacked like pastry kids chasing dogs through arched doorways. The next ring, black basalt temples where priests chant in low rhythmic hums. You reach the center. Red orichalcum glimmers under torchlight, and Poseidon's statue towers above all, straddling dolphins, holding a trident, eyes glowing like a storm on the horizon. Not bad for a story, right? But here's a question you don't ask at dinner. Where did Plato get this level of imagination? Because in 360 BCE, no one had seen massive cities with concentric canal systems. No one had mapped large island nations or theorized about advanced pre-flood civilizations. Unless someone had, a long, long time ago. Mainstream historical fact. Greek scholars frequently traveled to Egypt. Many admitted their mathematical and astronomical knowledge came from the Nile Valley. And the Egyptians loved keeping records. Walls, scrolls, tombs, they wrote everything down, especially things that connected them to their gods. Fringe theory time. The priests in Sais didn't tell Solon about Atlantis per se, but about a powerful kingdom that existed 9,000 years before his time, a kingdom that warred with early Athens and was ultimately destroyed by floods and earthquakes. That's not a bedtime story. That's a prehistoric war. And if the Egyptian dating is remotely accurate, that would place the events around 9600 BCE. That's just casually the end of the last ice age. Coincidence or breadcrumb? Historians still argue whether the Egyptian years meant literal 365-day cycles, or if that number had symbolic meaning. But either way, the number's too large to ignore. Plato isn't placing Atlantis in the known past. He's tossing it way back into a foggy, half-remembered world no one was supposed to recall. Unless they did. Let's talk about that name, Atlantis. Plato never actually says the people called it that. The name is Greek island of Atlas. Atlas is in the Titan who held up the sky. But Atlas also had a twin, Gadiros. Some scholars link this to Gadir, the ancient name for what's now Cadiz in Spain. So, are we talking Gibraltar, the Atlantic coast of Iberia? Maybe a western outpost of an Egyptian-linked empire. Or maybe Plato mashed together geography, myth, and metaphor like a mythological smoothie. Add a scoop of real history, a dash of poetic license, and boom, Atlantis a la mode. Still, something in your gut tells you he didn't invent it all, because myth doesn't emerge from nowhere. It echoes. You picture Solon, old and sunburned, scribbling down what the priest told him. The sands shift in the background, and beyond them, you imagine a long-forgotten shore, a city built in rings, lost to time, not metaphor but memory. And even now, as you drive or drift off, there's that tug in your chest, like something ancient is still out there, just past the horizon, waiting. You're not done with Egypt yet. No, you're leaning into the desert heat now, soft linen clinging to your arms, the smell of ink and parchment drifting on dry air. The Nile hums behind you, a slow ancient pulse. And just ahead in a temple older than most of what we call civilization, a priest whispers to Solon. This is where it begins, or maybe where it restarts. See, Plato didn't just invent the Egyptian link to make his story exotic. Egypt was at the time considered the elder statesman of wisdom and history. Greeks looked to Egypt the way modern folks romanticize ancient Tibet, or lost Amazon tribes full of secret knowledge and dusty scrolls no one else had the patience to read. So when Plato writes that Solon heard the story of Atlantis from Egyptian priests in the city of Sais, it lands differently. You picture a quiet chamber, sun filtering through carved columns, and the priest a man older than the stones he walks on, telling a tale about a war. A war between Atlantis and an early Athens. Wait, what? Yes, that's the part people forget. In Plato's version, Athens wasn't some backwater. It was the hero, the underdog that stood up to the mighty Atlantean Empire, repelled its invasion, and watched from the shore as divine punishment swallowed the enemy whole. A mainstream historical fact, ancient Egypt's own records speak of cyclical destruction. Floods, fires, the world rebooting itself every so often. In some creation myths, there's mention of Zep Tepi, the first time a golden age that existed long before known dynasties. Fringe theorists pounce on this. Zep Tepi, they whisper, was Atlantis. That early golden age wiped out by rising waters and earthquakes, that's not myth. That's prehistory remembered in symbols and stories. Now here's where it gets spicy. A 4,000-year-old papyrus fragment known as the Thule Papyrus, which may or may not be real, historians still argue, whether it's a forgery or misinterpreted diary entry, supposedly describes flying discs seen over ancient Egypt. You raise an eyebrow. Okay, fine, that's weird. But even if we toss out the aliens for now, don't worry, we'll pick them back up later. We're still left with Egypt as a keeper of extremely old records. Records that could have survived cataclysms. Because Egypt, as dry and sandy as it is fantastic at preserving things. Scrolls, skeletons, bread, and maybe at memories. You picture Solon squinting at columns of hieroglyphs, while the priest says something like, "You Greeks don't even remember your own past." And that hits different. Because if you've ever looked at modern civilization and thought, surely we're not the first to build big things, invent stuff, and then screw it all up, you're not alone. Let's put on our skeptical hats for a second. What if Atlantis wasn't just a single city? What if it was a civilization, one of many in a forgotten epoch, wiped out by rising seas, shifting continents, and the memory-erasing march of time? The Sahara, by the way, used to be green, lush, full of lakes and rivers. We know this. We found fish bones in the middle of the desert, and deep beneath the sand satellite imagery has revealed curious formations, lines, grids, circular shapes. Not proof sure, but suggestive. You grip the wheel a little tighter now, not because you're scared, but because your brain is starting to buzz. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian mythology reflects historical memory or pure allegory, but consider this: they built pyramids aligned with the stars. They tracked Sirius with terrifying precision. They embalmed their dead to preserve not just flesh, but knowledge. Maybe they didn't invent the Atlantis story. Maybe they remembered it. And maybe Plato, for all his philosophy, was just the messenger. Now let's talk about something called the king list. Found in multiple Egyptian temples, these lists detail rulers going back tens of thousands of years. Mainstream scholars say these are mythological kings, symbols, not real people. But fringe theorists ask why keep track of specific names and reign lengths if it's just fiction. The kings before the flood itself, and the kings that came after. Sounds familiar, right? You're beginning to feel it now. That strange mix of déjà vu and vertigo, like you've heard this story before, but from a different culture, or maybe a different lifetime. And just when you think it can't get any weirder, you remember the Temple of Edfu. That's right. Carved into its walls is something called the Edfu building text, a series of inscriptions that describe the construction of a primordial city by a race of godlike beings in a time before the Nile flowed. The city, they claim, was destroyed in a great catastrophe. The surviving gods scattered preserving fragments of knowledge. That city never named, but suspiciously similar to Plato's Atlantis in tone, shape, and fate. Some Egyptologists call it metaphor. Others pause just a beat too long. And you picture that temple sun-washed and cracked, holding secrets no one reads anymore. Except maybe you just did. You leave the Nile behind, but the desert isn't done with you. Not even close. Because now you're heading west into the sands of Mauritania. Into a place so strange, so eerily on brand it feels like a cosmic wink. Locals call it the Eye of the Sahara. Scientists, the richest structure. You're about to stare into a geological enigma that just might be Atlantis itself. From above, it's surreal, massive, concentric circles etched into the earth like a target 30 miles wide. Perfectly round, perfectly isolated, and just sitting there like it's waiting to be remembered. Now let's state the mainstream historical fact right away: the Risha structure is a natural formation. Formed by erosion, uplift, and time. No ancient masons carved it. No aliens dug it out with plasma drills. That's the standard take, and geologists will die on that hill. But, Ekemri, fringe researchers and more than a few curious minds with Google Earth and too much free time can't ignore the coincidences. First, the size roughly matches Plato's description of Atlantis's capital stadium-size rings, alternating water and land. Second, the shape: three concentric rings with a center island, just like Plato's obsessive breakdown. Third, the location west of Egypt, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, often interpreted as the Strait of Gibraltar, in what was once a lush, river-fed region during the Holocene. Not so long ago, this now barren land had grasslands, elephants, and flowing water. That desert you're picturing? Try again. Because historians still argue whether this area of the Sahara was habitable enough, long enough to support a civilization. Spoiler, it was. Even now you can feel your grip tightening. Because here comes the weird part: researchers have found saltwater traces and marine fossils around the structure. No oceans nearby today, but once entire seas swept through this region. A great flood or just geological change, you decide. Let's take a moment and ground this with some boots on sand detail. Imagine you're walking the Eye. The outermost ring feels like broken seashells and red grit under your shoes. You climb over sedimentary rock shaped like giant ribs. The wind howls in long, low bursts like it's trying to speak a language no one hears anymore. You reach the central mound. It's higher than the rest. A good place for a temple, maybe, or a palace. And here comes the callback. Remember Plato's orichalcum, the glowing red metal that gleamed in the Atlantean city center? Fun fringe theory: Mauritania has rich deposits of iron and red-tinged ores. Not proof sure, but poetic, isn't it? Still not convinced? Let's layer in more uncanny. The distance from the Rishat structure to the Atlas Mountains. Yes, Atlas, as in the Titan, is almost exactly the same as Plato's description of the island's relationship to mountainous regions. Atlas, Poseidon's son, was said to rule this lost land. Coincidence? Again. Then there's the timeline. The Rishat structure is ancient, yes, but so is the last major Atlantic seaboard flood around 11,600 years ago. That matches up shockingly well with the date Plato gives, 9,000 years before Solon, which lands us right at the Younger Dryas period. The Younger what? Here's your mainstream historical fact of the night. The Younger Dryas was a sudden return to near-glacial conditions, a climatic sucker punch that interrupted Earth's warming. It ended abruptly, possibly due to a cataclysm, massive floods, melting glaciers, and planet-wide upheaval. And here's your fringe twist. Some scientists believe this cataclysm could have been caused by a comet impact or airburst. Sound familiar? Boom. Earthquakes, tsunamis, entire regions vanishing beneath water. Now reread Plato's words. He describes Atlantis disappearing in a single day and night of misfortune. That's not poetic pacing. That sounds like disaster weather. Historians still argue whether Plato's timeline is allegorical or literal. But geological layers tell a story too, and they whisper of sudden endings of civilizations erased not by war, but by water. You lean into the wheel now, headlights cutting across the dark road like ancient beams across murky seas. And in your mind's eye, the Risha structure pulses like an open eye staring back across millennia. But here's the kicker. There's no debris, no ruins, no columns. Nothing that screams, look, I was a city once. And that's the clincher for skeptics. If Atlantis was here, where are the walls, the bones, the tools? Well, in the Sahara is a jealous keeper. Anything not buried deep would be erased in centuries, not millennia. Sand scours, wind strips, flash floods still possible today would sweep even stone away. And if the flood that destroyed Atlantis was real, you're not looking for a city under sand. You're looking for one that's been scrubbed from the planet. So the eye remains massive, mysterious, and maddeningly quiet. You take a slow breath. Maybe it's just geology, maybe it's more. But as you coast through the darkness, the landscape feels older, like something big happened here, like something wants to be remembered. And you poor driver, curious dreamer, philosopher of the Midnight Highway, you're not quite sure if you've stumbled onto truth or just the best ghost story ever told. But you do know one thing. The desert doesn't lie. It just doesn't speak plainly. Now your mind drifts across the Atlantic. You feel it, that tug toward the sea, toward deep blue mysteries and white foamed edges, where continents almost kiss. You're chasing Atlantis after all, and Plato did say it lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Today that's the Strait of Gibraltar, the ancient gateway between the Mediterranean and the open Atlantic Ocean. So let's head west beyond the Rock of Gibraltar, past where Greek ships once trembled at the thought of endless ocean. You're now in territory uncharted, or rather charted and forgotten. Cue the Canary Islands. Yes, that sunny touristy archipelago, volcanic, windswept, oddly placed. But to ancient mariners, these scattered peaks jutting from the sea were more than just pretty. Some believed them to be the last remnants of a sunken continent. Mainstream historical fact, the Canary Islands have been known since antiquity. The Romans called them the Fortunate Isles. Greek historians like Plutarch spoke of a great land to the west where the gods once lived in peace. Fringe thinkers. They've connected the dots perhaps too eagerly. What if those islands weren't just scattered bits of land, but mountain peaks? The high points of a larger plateau now lost beneath the ocean. You squint into the fog of ancient maps. Many of them strangely show land masses in the Atlantic. Islands where there are none today. Sailors' tales or faded memories. Scholars still argue whether these depictions are symbolic cartographic errors or echoes of a once real place. Let's talk about one of the more peculiar cases, the Peary race map created in 1513. It shows parts of South America with uncanny accuracy, including some coastal details not officially discovered until centuries later. But more intriguing is what's absent or altered. Some claim it hints at lost lands now submerged. A cartographic relic or just a lucky guess, the debate lingers. And then there's the legend of Antilia, a phantom island that popped up on maps throughout the 15th century. Sailors swore they saw it, a mountainous land with 7 cities and golden towers, until eventually it stopped appearing. Did it vanish? Was it ever there? Or did sea levels simply rise a few too many feet over the centuries? You're probably wondering, could a whole continent just disappear? Here's your mainstream grounding. Yes, parts of Earth's crust have sunk before tectonic plates shift subduction zones. Gulf coastlines, entire microcontinents have been found underwater. One such place is Zealandia. Yes, really a mostly submerged landmass near New Zealand, only discovered in the last few decades. So now your steering wheel becomes a compass. You coast westward, waves of history lapping at your imagination. And then brace yourself, you hit the Atlantic Ridge. Not literally, don't worry, but geologically you're floating above it. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is a sprawling underwater mountain range running like a spine down the center of the ocean. Where tectonic plates pull apart, molten rock rises, forming ridges, volcanoes, islands. It's slow-motion chaos beneath the waves. Now mainstream geology says this ridge has been forming steadily for millions of years. Nothing sudden, nothing Atlantis shattering. But fringe theorists stare at that ridge like it's a puzzle. A line where a landmass might once have existed only to crack, flood, and vanish. They imagine Atlantis sitting atop that ridge, a hub of energy, a meeting place of ley lines, pulsing with ancient knowledge. Then earthquake, eruption, collapse. Historians still argue whether the Atlantic Ridge could hide any remnants of a sunken civilization. The ocean is deep, The ocean is secretive. We've mapped more of the moon's surface than we have of our ocean floor. Here's your quirky tidbit. In 1898, a deep-sea cable-laying crew reported dragging up carved stone columns from the mid-Atlantic. Probably natural formations. Probably. But you feel that itch again. The maybe. Because Atlantis isn't just a place, it's a question. You're driving past twilight now. Your headlights scan the empty road like sonar. Your thoughts drift below past currents and coral into ruins unseen. You picture plazas under pressure, statues blanketed in silt, a city drowned in darkness still echoing with lost names. And then you remember stories about Atlanteans didn't stop with Plato. Later writers, mystics, and occultists would claim that Atlanteans fled the disaster, escaped, scattered, survived. And if so, where did they go? They scatter like stardust in a storm. The survivors, if you believe the tale, fled in all directions. Their once proud continent gone beneath the waves, but their knowledge, their fire still burning. And so begins a theory more tantalizing than any ruin that Atlantis didn't die. It seeded the world. You coast down an empty highway and your mind runs ahead across oceans, through jungles into the high Andes and the Nile Delta. Because if Atlantis was the mother culture, her fingerprints should be everywhere. Let's start with Egypt. Mainstream historians agree that Egyptian civilization is one of the oldest, tracing its roots back over 5,000 years. Impressive. But now imagine a civilization, even older one, that whispered its secrets to the Nile before the pyramids rose. Enter the Osirian legend. Ancient texts speak of Zep-Tepi, the first time a golden age when gods walked among men. Thoth, Osiris. Isis, all arriving from elsewhere, bringing writing, agriculture, astronomy. Not divine beings maybe, but survivors. Here's the quirky bit. The Temple of Edfu in Egypt contains inscriptions that talk about a primordial island destroyed in a flood, whose wise builders came to Egypt and started over. Coincidence? Or someone scribbling Atlantis into the margins of Egyptian history? Historians still argue whether these first-time myths are pure invention or fragmented memory, oral history stretched thin across time. Now swing west to Mesoamerica. The Maya, the Olmecs, the Aztecs. Advanced calendars, pyramid structures, a deep understanding of celestial movements, and buried deep in their mythology tales of lands sinking into the sea of gods, fleeing east of civilizing strangers arriving by boat. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, was said to have come from across the ocean, bearded, pale-skinned, and teaching law, art, and astronomy. Too on the nose, maybe. But Atlantis theories thrive on details like this. Too many puzzle pieces that almost fit. Even the Andes get pulled into the myth. Tiwanaku, a stunning ruin near Lake Titicaca, sits at an altitude that makes you wheeze just looking at it. According to some researchers, the site predates the Inca by thousands of years, and its megalithic stones, some weighing over 100 tons, are carved with a precision hard to explain using primitive tools. Mainstream archaeology offers practical answers, ingenuity, teamwork, sledges, and ramps. Fringe thinkers nod politely, then ask, but where are the blueprints? Where are the mistakes? You don't build that well unless you're copying something older, something perfected. Cue the theory. Atlanteans fleeing their sunken homeland brought their knowledge to South America. The coastal ruins, the step pyramids, even the myth of Viracocha, the bearded god who walked the land after a great flood, echo Plato's vanished seafarers. And as you cruise along in your car, somewhere between skeptical and starry-eyed, your dashboard light flickers like a torch passed from hand to hand across time. But maybe you want something meatier, harder than legend, more structural. Let's talk megaliths. You've seen them, or you've heard of them. Stonehenge, Göbekli Tepe, Baalbek, the Moai of Easter Island. Colossal stones, some over 800 tons, carved, transported, erected. Mainstream fact. Many of these sites predate the wheel, some predate agriculture. Göbekli Tepe, for example, clocks in at over 11,000 years old. That's before pottery, before cities, before anyone should have been carving 20-foot stone pillars with abstract animal symbols. So who built them? The standard narrative: humans did. Slowly, with teamwork, maybe some clever levers. But Atlantis romantics see another hand, a lost culture with knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and engineering. The kind of culture that would have looked at massive stone and thought, yeah, let's make that levitate. Historians still argue whether ancient megaliths indicate forgotten technology or just underestimated ingenuity. But you can't help noticing the similarities between distant sites. The T-shaped pillars at Göbekli Tepe, the polygonal masonry in Peru, the sacred alignment with stars and solstices, different continents, same signature. It's as if someone long ago set up schools of stone, monuments not to gods but to memory. The Atlantis theory at its most optimistic is a story of cultural continuity, that humanity didn't rise in isolation, but was rekindled again and again by the echoes of a fallen age. Not conquerors, not saviors, just survivors. And perhaps, teachers. You slow the car now, a sign flashing by. Somewhere in the dark another town sleeps. But in your head, stone temples rise and sink again in slow tidal rhythm. Could Plato's legend be less about geography and more about genealogy? Not where Atlantis was, but where it went. Your eyes scan the road, but your mind is buried deep in stone myth and starlight. Because if Atlantis seeded civilization, then maybe it left us something more than monuments. Maybe it left us knowledge, ancient scattered half-remembered, lost sciences hiding in plain sight, tucked inside symbols, rituals, and architectural alignments. Let's step into the temple. No specific one, just a pattern. Across Egypt, Central America, India, even Stonehenge, there's an odd consistency, sacred structures obsessively aligned with celestial bodies. The sun at solstice, the moon at its zenith, the stars, especially Orion, Sirius, and the Pleiades. Mainstream historical fact, ancient cultures track the skies. It helped them with seasons, planting, navigation. Entire calendars were shaped by these cycles. Accurate too. Some temples are aligned to solar points with a precision modern builders would admire. But here comes the fringe theory, walking softly in its linen robes. What if those alignments weren't just agricultural? What if they encoded something deeper? Take the Great Pyramid. Yeah, the big one. Mainstream Egyptology says it was built around 2560 BCE as a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu. But there's no mummy inside, no inscription naming the pharaoh, just geometry, perfect, cold, silent geometry. Its base is almost a perfect square. It's aligned to true north with less than 0.05 degrees of error. The ratio of its height to its perimeter equals yep pita, the speed of light, a number eerily close to its coordinates. Just math, just coincidence. Historians still argue whether these details are intentional design or modern numerology reaching a bit too far. Still, Atlantis enthusiasts see the pyramid as something else, a repository, not a tomb, but a machine, a monument designed to preserve knowledge, harmonize energy, or map Earth's dimensions. And they're not alone in that thinking. The Dogon tribe of Mali, for instance, have long claimed their ancestors came from Sirius, specifically Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye. Their traditional stories describe it as a small, dense companion star to Sirius A. Modern astronomy didn't confirm this until the 20th century. So how'd they know? Cue the eyebrows. Mainstream answer: contact with European astronomers in the 1800s, maybe a little myth-enhancing afterward. Fringe theory, ancient knowledge, handed down, preserved. Atlantis left clues in myth. You shift in your seat. Your foot taps just above the pedal. This is the part where you start to wonder if there's a blueprint hiding behind mythological metaphors. That maybe the gods and heroes of old weren't metaphors at all, but distant echoes of people who actually lived, walked, sailed, taught, and then vanished. Let's talk Atlantis technology. Plato describes them as master engineers, canals running through their capital, bridges and harbors, hot and cold running water, grand stadiums. He even mentions orichalcum, a glowing metal said to be second only to gold. Sounds sci-fi, right? But remember some of his descriptions, like concentric ring cities and canal-fed agriculture, match archaeological sites discovered after his time. For instance, the city of Corral in Peru, or the ringed stone site of Risha structure in Mauritania, both bearing a suspicious whiff of Plato's blueprints. Quirky fact: in 1900, a diver off the coast of Antikythera, Greece, pulled up a barnacle-crusted chunk of bronze. Inside cogs, gears, an ancient mechanical computer, the Antikythera mechanism, dated to 100 BCE, capable of tracking planets and eclipses. Mainstream archaeologists say it was probably developed by Greek engineers using Babylonian knowledge. But others wonder if that existed 2,000 years ago, what existed 10,000 years ago before the seas rose. Historians still argue whether the Antikythera device was a one-off or the surviving echo of a much older lost technological tradition. One that maybe didn't spring from nothing but was handed down salvaged perhaps from a catastrophe. You drive in silence for a beat, the thought lands hard. We're not just talking about lost stones anymore. We're talking about lost systems. Imagine electricity without wires, energy from the earth, knowledge of resonance, magnetism, healing through sound or frequency, tantalizing ideas that now live in obscure footnotes, fringe YouTube channels, and the quiet belief that maybe our ancestors weren't fumbling toward the future, but trying to remember the past. The road hums beneath you like a buried cable. And now you start wondering, was Atlantis a city, a continent, or a cipher? Maybe the point of the myth isn't the place, but the pattern. You look around, at the lights, the signals, the structured world we think is so new. What if it's a return, not an arrival? Maybe we're Atlantis children wandering in amnesia, rebuilding the dream brick by brick. You turn down the music, somehow silence feels more appropriate. Because what we're about to enter isn't physical. It's not a ruin. It's a memory, a vibration, a ghost inside the human mind. If Atlantis passed down knowledge, some believe it wasn't just technological or architectural. It was spiritual, mental, cosmic. You've heard of chakras, right energy centers, an idea that spans Hindu tradition, Tibetan texts, even parts of ancient Egyptian iconography, all describing the body as a vessel of light current resonance. Now imagine a civilization that didn't just believe in this system, but built entire cities to reflect it. Mainstream historians, they'll tell you ancient cities were built for practical needs, defense, water, access, agriculture. But zoom out far enough, and you notice strange symmetries, cities arranged along ley lines, temples placed to mirror constellations, pyramids pointing to stars as if syncing with the cosmos. Historians still argue whether these alignments are intentional or a case of modern humans connecting dots that weren't meant to be connected. But once you see the pattern, it's hard to unsee. Fringe thinkers go further. They claim Atlantis wasn't just a lost city, it was the apex of a high-vibration civilization. One where science and spirituality weren't separate things, but two languages describing the same universal song. They say the Atlanteans used sound to move stone, light to heal, crystals to store energy and intention. Too much, maybe, but remember that quirky little discovery from 1994, the Bosnian pyramids. A cluster of massive triangular hills, at first dismissed as natural formations, began revealing tunnels, chambers, and strange acoustic anomalies. Underground spaces where certain frequencies seemed to resonate endlessly. Could it be coincidence or the echo of an old forgotten science? You shift in your seat again, not from discomfort, from curiosity. Because here's something else. Many cultures, separated by oceans, share eerily similar creation myths. A golden age, a hubristic fall, a great flood. It's everywhere. The Greeks, of course, the Bible. The Mesopotamians had the tale of Utnapishtim, survivor of a deluge. The Hindus tell of Manu. The Aztecs speak of 5 suns and 4 great destructions. One flood may be metaphor, but 50? Mainstream geology tells us the last ice age ended around 11,700 years ago, the Younger Dryas boundary. Around that time, massive glacial melts caused global sea levels to rise rapidly. Coastlines vanished, islands submerged, whole regions flooded. Fact, not fiction. Now picture this, a coastal civilization, advanced thriving sailing building, and then melt, surge, silence. Historians still argue whether these post-glacial floods were gradual or sudden, but there's growing consensus whatever happened, it reshaped the world and erased parts of it. What if Plato's 9,000 years before Solon was just a mistranslation, or symbolic? Many scholars suggest it was closer to 900 years. But others say, what if Plato was right? What if Atlantis fell right at the end of the Ice Age when sea levels surged and everything low-lying disappeared? Let's dip into your quirky fact for the section. In 2001, marine archaeologists off the coast of India discovered what looked like submerged ruins near Dwarka. Sonar scans revealed structures, roads, walls. Carbon dating placed artifacts at over 9,000 years old. Mainstream archaeology remains skeptical. But the water doesn't lie, and there's more. In Japan, the Yonaguni Monument, a sprawling underwater structure off the coast of Okinawa, features massive terraces, steps, and pillars. Is it a natural formation, a sunken city, still debated? But it stirs the same question: what else is hiding beneath the waves? You feel it again, that uneasy excitement. What if we've always been a post-apocalyptic species? Not rising for the first time, but rebuilding after something older fell. The implications whisper behind every myth, every temple, every anomaly we can't quite explain. Atlantis becomes less of a place and more of a pattern, a blueprint, a reminder scratched into stone, and story: you were more than you remember. And maybe that's the most human thing of all: to forget and to rediscover. To fall and then search for the path back to the light. Outside your windshield, the night thickens. The road runs on. But in your mind, glowing symbols spiral on temple walls, vibrating gently, waiting for you to remember how to read them. The wind brushes your side mirror like it's passing secrets. You glance up at the stars, same constellations Plato saw, same ones the Atlanteans may have worshipped, aligned with, or even mapped. You begin to realize, if Atlantis did exist, it wasn't just about lost land or sunken temples. It was about legacy. And some legacies aren't carved in stone, they're coded in the blood. Let's talk about memory, genetic memory. A little fringe. Sure. But even mainstream science now explores the idea of epigenetics, that trauma knowledge, even survival instincts, can be passed from generation to generation. You inherit more than just eye color. You inherit experience. So, what if the story of Atlantis survives, not because people read it, but because people feel it? That deep in the subconscious layers of our minds, something ancient still stirs, like a low drumbeat we don't consciously hear, but instinctively march to. Mainstream historical fact: every culture, no matter how isolated, carries origin myths, often involving gods descending from the sky or from the sea. They bring knowledge, order, language. Then they vanish. We call them deities, but what if they were just people? Refugees, survivors, Atlanteans cloaked in myth. And now let's take a road trip within a road trip to South Africa, because this is where things get really strange. Near the town of Waterville Boven lies a vast cluster of circular stone ruins, often called Adam's Calendar. Mainstream archaeologists estimate them to be a few thousand years old. But fringe researchers, especially Michael Tellinger, claim they might be 75,000 to 200,000 years old. Yeah, that's not a typo. They argue the structures align to solstices, equinoxes, and may even map out the movement of Orion's belt as it would have appeared tens of thousands of years ago. Skeptics say erosion, coincidence, just sheep pens. But the debate rages on. Historians still argue whether these ruins represent mere pastoral leftovers or a civilization we've yet to fully grasp. A civilization that didn't build cities the way we understand them, but constructed energy grids, spiritual amplifiers, and star maps on a scale we can't comprehend. A civilization like Atlantis. Here's your quirky fact of the night: the ruins in southern Africa sit on top of one of the richest gold deposits on Earth. And Sumerian texts, the earliest written records known, mention that the gods, the Anunnaki, came to Earth to mine gold. From Africa. You feel that little chill again? Suddenly, Plato's Atlanteans harvesting vast mineral resources doesn't seem so isolated. Suddenly, ancient myth sounds a bit like a forgotten business plan. And that brings us to a new kind of survivor: the builder. Let's look at strange architecture that seems out of time. At Baalbek in Lebanon, the Temple of Jupiter rests on three stones, each weighing over 800 tons. That's more than a Boeing 747. Even with modern cranes, we'd struggle to lift them. So who moved them? Why? Mainstream theory: Romans built it using incredible manpower and engineering. Maybe they had lost techniques. Fringe theory: the site existed long before Rome, and the Romans merely borrowed it. That base platform, so massive, so precise, it belonged to a lost age. Atlantean even. The truth still debated. No definitive quarry tools found. No clear transportation method. Just stones so large they defy explanation and sit there like giants playing dead. All over the world, these megaliths appear. Not randomly, but everywhere. Easter Island, Pumapunku, Nan Madol, Cambodia, Japan, Ireland. Too many for coincidence. Too remote for cultural exchange. It's like someone long ago whispered the same architectural spell into different ears across different continents. You wonder, were these people following inherited knowledge? Ancient schematics passed down through secret orders, oral traditions so sacred they lasted millennia. You tap your fingers on the steering wheel slowly now. The rhythm, familiar. Almost like you've heard it before, like it's been waiting. You think back to Atlantis' fall, Plato said it happened in a day and a night. But what if the end wasn't instant? What if it came in waves, geological, societal, psychic, and those who fled took what they could, tools, stories, star lore, memory. Maybe the survivors didn't just rebuild. Maybe they warned. Embedded messages in temples encoded flood myths, positioned cities so future skywatchers might notice the same patterns and remember. Not facts, not history, but a riddle, a rescue plan. One meant for you. You let out a slow breath, headlights painting the road ahead like a ribbon of light through the unknown. You're starting to see it, aren't you? Not just the idea of Atlantis as a lost city beneath the waves, but Atlantis as a story woven into the fabric of who we are. Carried through time by those who remembered, disguised as myths, riddles, and maybe even religions. Let's dive into that now, how ancient belief systems might secretly trace their roots to Atlantis itself. Start with Egypt. We've talked about the pyramids, sure, but zoom in on their pantheon. Gods like Thoth, the ibis-headed deity of wisdom, writing, and magic. The Greeks later equated him with Hermes, but fringe theories call him something older still, an Atlantean priest king who survived the destruction and brought sacred knowledge to the Nile. Ever heard of the Emerald Tablets of Thoth? Supposedly written by Thoth himself, the text describes the rise and fall of Atlantis. Soul reincarnation, energy manipulation, even interdimensional travel. Mainstream scholars dismiss it as a modern hoax, but that hasn't stopped countless spiritual seekers from poring over its cryptic verses, searching for keys to ancient wisdom. Historians still argue whether Egyptian culture sprang up independently or inherited knowledge from some older civilization, because Egypt seems to arrive on the stage already advanced with medicine, architecture, and astronomical calendars fully formed. Then there's the Maya. On the other side of the world, they too track the heavens with obsessive precision. Their long count calendar stretches back to 3114 BCE, and their mythology, it speaks of cycles of worlds destroyed and remade, of great floods, of godlike beings who came from the stars. Again, same themes, different continent. You reach for your water bottle, take a sip, but your mind is racing faster than your car. What if the gods weren't just symbols? What if they were survivors? Refugees from Atlantis passing down pieces of a shattered past, each culture receiving a fragment like a shard of stained glass. Here's a quirky fact for you. In the Aztec tradition, the god Quetzalcoatl, feathered serpent teacher of knowledge and agriculture, is said to have come from the east by sea, described as bearded, pale-skinned, cloaked in white. Sound familiar? Plato's Atlanteans were fair-skinned, seafaring, advanced. Some early Spanish conquistadors were mistaken for Quetzalcoatl's return. Coincidence, sure, but compelling. And then there's Zep-Tepi, the first time in Egyptian mythology. A golden age when gods walked the earth. A time of peace and wisdom before chaos returned. Mainstream Egyptologists label Zep-Tepi a mythical era, an allegory, not a real epic. But if you line up timelines, Zep-Tepi seems to align with that mysterious period before Egypt's Old Kingdom, when vast temples were being built and nobody's quite sure how or why. Historians still argue whether this first time refers to a forgotten pre-dynastic civilization or is just spiritual metaphor. But the same pattern emerges elsewhere. In Sumer, we hear of Eridu, the first city built by gods after a great flood. In Hindu texts, we get the Satya Yuga, the age of truth when humans lived for centuries and spoke directly with divinities. In Norse lore, there's Asgard. In China, tales of celestial emperors descending from the sky. Too much overlap for comfort. All of them begin with a higher age, a fall, a flood, and a slow climb back up. It's almost like the entire world remembers something it refuses to name. Let's not forget the symbol of Atlantis itself, concentric rings of land and sea. Plato wasn't vague about this, he gave detailed measurements, even distances. That iconic design shows up in rock art, city layouts, even corporate logos. But did you know the symbol of Atlantis is eerily echoed in the labyrinth? The ancient Greek labyrinth isn't just the home of the Minotaur, it's a metaphor for remembering, for descent and return. In some esoteric traditions, the labyrinth is Atlantis, or rather the mind's journey to reclaim what was lost. You drive on eyes flicking toward the horizon. The dark hides 1,000 landscapes, but now you're seeing more than land. You're seeing patterns. And maybe that's the point. Atlantis as a civilization may be gone, but Atlantis as an idea, a whisper of utopia, a memory of greatness, a cautionary tale of pride, has never really left. It lives in temples and texts, in dreams and déjà vu, in the uncanny feeling that we once knew more than we do now. You're not just a traveler tonight. You're a seeker, following the road back not just through space but through time. And each mile brings you closer. The road hums beneath you a steady rhythm like the breath of the earth itself. It's comforting, hypnotic. But in the back of your mind, that rhythm sounds familiar, like something ancient echoing back. By now, Atlantis isn't just a lost city to you anymore. It's an echo chamber of ideas, symbols, patterns, and maybe warnings. So let's dig deeper, not into stone or sea, but into the mind itself. What if the real treasure of Atlantis wasn't gold or tech or even architecture, but consciousness? We live in a time obsessed with external achievements, space travel, AI, medical marvels. But the Atlanteans, if the legends hold any truth, may have taken a different path entirely. One inward. You've probably heard of the Akashic Records. In esoteric traditions, it's described as a non-physical library of all human experience, past, present, and potential futures. Think of it like the universe's cloud storage. It's said that mystics, prophets, and advanced souls can access it during meditation dreams or altered states. Fringe theorists suggest this was standard knowledge in Atlantis, not something elite or mystical, just part of the education system. Children learned how to tune their minds to frequencies beyond the senses. Schools taught geometry and astronomy alongside dreamwalking and telepathy. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient mystery schools did exist from Eleusis in Greece to Heliopolis in Egypt to Vedic ashrams in India. These weren't just places of learning, they were transformational hubs. Think Hogwarts but real and dustier. Historians still argue whether these schools preserve fragments of a lost global wisdom tradition or simply developed independently, but too many similarities remain: sacred sound, sacred geometry, spiritual initiation, death and rebirth rituals. And here comes your quirky dose of weird. In 1961, a hypnotist named Edgar Cayce gave a series of readings while in trance, claiming to access the past lives of individuals. He spoke of Atlantis, often saying many people alive today had reincarnated from that era. His prediction: evidence of Atlantis would rise again near Bimini in the Bahamas around 1968. Guess what? In 1968, divers discovered the Bimini Road, a series of massive underwater stones resembling a man-made pathway. Coincidence, maybe, but the timing made waves. And speaking of reincarnation, many ancient traditions saw the soul as cyclical. Life after life, we rise, fall, and return, hopefully each time a bit wiser. The Atlanteans, according to fringe lore, were fully aware of this. Death wasn't the end, it was a doorway. Imagine a civilization that didn't fear death, that knew it would come back again and again, so it focused on evolving the soul, not just the society. Now here's something you might not expect on a quiet nighttime drive: pine cones. Yeah, stay with me. The pine cone shows up everywhere in ancient art, from the staff of Osiris in Egypt, to the ruins of Angkor Wat, to a massive statue in Vatican City. Why? Because it's believed to symbolize the pineal gland, often called the third eye. That little gland tucked deep in your brain, associated with intuition, dreams, even spiritual vision. Fringe thinkers say this gland was crucial to Atlantean society. They knew how to activate it through diet, meditation, sound, and maybe even crystal technology. We laugh at crystal healing now, but the tech world uses quartz in watches, computers, even space probes. Crystals do store and transmit energy. It's not magic, it's science we barely understand. You blink, focusing back on the road. The lines are still there, solid. But something inside feels like it's expanded, like you're now driving both forward and inward. And maybe that's the lesson of Atlantis. It isn't a destination you can sail to. It's a frequency, a mindset, a spiritual GPS that only works when you stop looking outside and start tuning within. You remember those stories we told earlier of Atlantean survivors spreading knowledge across the world? Maybe they didn't carry scrolls or relics. Maybe what they really passed down was the map of consciousness itself, hidden in pyramids, echoed in myths, buried inside you. That gut feeling you've had all your life. that there's something more just beneath the surface. That's Atlantis whispering. And you on this dark road with stars above and mystery all around are finally starting to hear it. You drive on deeper into the night, and yet it doesn't feel darker. It feels wider. Like the shadows aren't empty but full, full of questions, full of memories that don't quite belong to you, but maybe always have. Let's flip the lens again. What if Atlantis didn't sink? What if it simply moved? Not in the literal tectonic sense, but dimensionally. Disappeared from the physical world and transitioned into another layer of reality. Sounds like science fiction, right? But hang tight because we're not drifting as far off course as it seems. Let's talk vibration. Ancient traditions from Tibet to the Yucatan emphasize the importance of frequency, not in music but in consciousness. The idea that everything matter thought even time vibrates. And by shifting your frequency, you shift your reality. You've probably heard of the veil between worlds being thin in certain places or times. Halloween, ancient burial sites, the Bermuda Triangle. Some believe Atlantis operated on such a high frequency that when its people fell out of alignment through greed, ego, or war, the entire civilization dropped out of this plane. Not drowned, not destroyed, just phased out. Think of it like a radio station. If you're tuned to 101.9, you won't hear what's happening on 102.5, even if it's broadcasting right next to you. Atlantis, in this view, didn't vanish, it detuned. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient sacred sites around the world are often built on geomagnetic anomalies, places where Earth's energy behaves strangely. Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, the Great Pyramid, even Sedona, Arizona. Coincidence or intentional? Historians still argue whether ancient builders chose these sites for practical reasons, water sources, trade routes, or for energetic ones, because maybe they weren't just building cities. Maybe they were building gateways. Here's your quirky interlude. In 2003, scientists discovered a massive pyramid buried beneath Bosnia. Yes, Bosnia. The local researcher, Dr. Semir Osmanagic, claimed it was 30,000 years old with tunnels that emit ultrasonic frequencies and negative ions. Most archaeologists scoffed, but independent studies showed something strange. People felt better after spending time inside. Migraines vanished. Inflammation decreased. You laugh, a healing pyramid in Eastern Europe. Why not? If the Atlanteans mastered energy manipulation, as many fringe theorists claim, then physical structures may have been more than shelter or status. They were harmonic instruments. Each temple a tuning fork, each monument a frequency anchor. Now circle back to Plato's account. He didn't just describe technology or wealth, he emphasized morality. The fall of Atlantis wasn't because of a cataclysm alone. It was spiritual decay, a turning away from the divine, a civilization too powerful for its own good, unbalanced by its own brilliance. Sound familiar? Some say we're on the same trajectory. Atlantis then isn't just history, it's prophecy. A mirror held up to every golden age that forgets its source. The Mayans warned of it. So did the Hopi. Even in Christian texts you find echoes of a great fall, a flood of reckoning. So maybe the question isn't where is Atlantis, but when will we become it? Maybe we're already halfway there. Your hands tighten on the wheel. You think about our world now, about satellites and skyscrapers and simulated realities. About our obsession with speed and status and self. You wonder if we suddenly had to leave it all behind, what would you carry? What knowledge would you save? Who would you become if the waves came tomorrow? The wind picks up again, a little more insistent this time, like the past pressing its face against the window, asking to be let in. But you're not afraid, because this isn't a horror story. It's a reminder. Atlantis was brilliant, bold, and yes, flawed, but it might have also been hopeful. A civilization that understood time differently, not as a straight line, but as a spiral. Rise and fall, sleep and wake. And you're in that spiral now. Not just a listener, a node, a point on the great pattern. The car hums beneath you. You don't need a map. You're already on the road back. The lines on the road keep sliding past, but they aren't just painted anymore. They're etched, not in asphalt, but in time. You're moving forward, yes, but also backward, downward, inward, like driving through memory itself. And speaking of memory, what if Atlantis isn't just in ancient ruins or underwater ridges, but in your DNA? No, really, let's get a little weird. You've earned it. Imagine this. Buried deep inside you, maybe even in the so-called junk DNA, are sleeping strands, coded remnants from a forgotten era. You've probably heard phrases like cellular memory or ancestral trauma. But what about ancestral wisdom? What if something in your body remembers Atlantis? Mainstream science confirms that humans have epigenetic memory, traits and tendencies passed down not just genetically, but through experience. A famine changes your grandparents, and that stress can echo inside you. So who's to say something deeper, older, Atlantean isn't humming in the background of your own biology? Historians still argue whether human civilization is older than we think. Most agree Homo sapiens have existed for at least 300,000 years. But agriculture, writing, architecture, only in the last 10,000. So what were we doing all that time? Waiting for a flood? Some theorists suggest that advanced civilizations may have risen and fallen multiple times, Atlantis just being one chapter. The Ice Age melting was dramatic enough to drown continents. Entire coastlines vanished. And with them, cities, archives, cultures. You sip your coffee and think about how fragile everything is. How easy it would be to lose Wi-Fi, then electricity, then history itself. Poof, gone. Just like that. Let's swing back to Plato for a second. He says Atlantis existed 9,000 years before his time. That's roughly 11,600 years ago. Know what else happened then? The Younger Dryas event, a sudden global cooling likely triggered by a comet or rapid glacial melt. It caused massive climate shifts, sea level rise, and, you guessed it, devastating floods. It's not fantasy, it's geology. And in that same period, we find curious structures like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built with precise astronomical alignments, megaliths arranged with intention, carvings of animals and cosmic scenes. Radiocarbon dating puts it at over 11,000 years old, older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids. Mainstream archaeologists admit it rewrites human history. People back then weren't supposed to be that advanced. But maybe they were, because they remembered something from before the flood. Maybe the builders of Göbekli Tepe weren't inventing civilization. Maybe they were preserving it. Your headlights bounce across a curve in the road. A fox darts into the trees. For a second, you could swear its eyes glinted like silver. You wonder, how much do animals remember? How much do you? Let's throw in another twist, dreams. People all over the world have reported eerily similar dreams. Floods, crystal cities, skyships, collapse. Not just after watching documentaries, but before. As children, as recurring themes. Archetypal dreams of a place that felt like home, but doesn't exist on any map. Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, believed in the collective unconscious, a shared memory bank of human experience. Atlantis, in this view, might be less of a place and more of a psychic echo. A metaphor burned so deeply into our collective soul that we keep dreaming it into reality again and again. You smile. Not everything has to be provable. Some truths live in the gut, in intuition, in the subtle thrum of goosebumps when you hear a story that feels too familiar. And that's the real trick, isn't it? Atlantis isn't waiting to be found. It's waiting to be recognized. And maybe, just maybe, it already has been. Not in textbooks or documentaries, but in us. In how we reach for something more, time and time again. So go ahead, roll down the window. Let the air in. You're not just driving anymore. You're remembering. The road stretches on, but it no longer feels like a simple highway. It feels like a bridge. Between centuries, between worlds, between what is and what might have been. You glance at the stars above. Those same silent witnesses who've looked down on every rise and fall. From the first firelit camp to the last space probe. And maybe, just maybe, to Atlantis too. Let's talk about why this myth has lasted so long. Myths don't survive 2,000 years because they're false. They survive because they're useful, because they speak to something universal. Atlantis isn't just a place, it's a lesson. A civilization with immense power and unmatched beauty, brought down by its own imbalance. Doesn't that feel familiar? You think about our own world. Climate crisis, AI acceleration, oceans choking on plastic. And then you hear Plato's voice, quietly echoing from the past, warning, When divine portion fades and human nature overcomes, they become unable to carry their prosperity with moderation. You exhale. Yeah, sounds about right. Historians still argue whether Plato's account was meant as literal history or a moral parable. Some say it was his way of criticizing Athens. Others believe he was relaying a much older story passed down through Egypt's priesthood. But the truth is, does it matter? Because here's the fringe tidbit of the night. Several 20th century scientists and mystics, including Nikola Tesla and Rudolf Steiner, believe knowledge from Atlantis still influenced modern inventions. That intuitive leaps in technology didn't come from pure logic, but from memory, subconscious recall, echoes. And some modern thinkers push it further. What if human evolution itself has been nudged by lost civilizations? A kind of cosmic insurance policy. Every time we collapse, we rise again. Faster, smarter, a little more aware. But here's the catch. Every reboot comes with risk. Atlantis may not have been destroyed by fire or water alone, but by hubris. By choosing dominance over balance, extraction over stewardship, by believing it was untouchable. And now, look around. Smartphones smarter than people, satellites watching our every move, entire ecosystems vanishing overnight. We're at another tipping point, and you're driving through it. Not metaphorically, literally. This moment right now between streetlights and shadows is where it begins, or ends, or restarts. You see, Atlantis was more than a cautionary tale. It was also a promise. A civilization that once touched the stars, perhaps not with rockets, but with awareness. Not through domination, but through harmony, through sound, energy, consciousness. And even if it fell, maybe that knowledge never fully died. Maybe it lives on in every sacred site aligned with constellations, in every myth of sky gods and great floods, in every intuitive dream that makes no sense but refuses to fade. And maybe, just maybe, it lives on in you, not in your memories, but in your longing. The longing for peace, for wisdom, for balance, for something that can't be bought, streamed, or clicked. A whisper that says, there's more. More to the story, more to the world, more to you. Your tires hum softly, your hands rest steady. You're not chasing Atlantis anymore. You're becoming it, one choice at a time, one quiet realization, one spark of consciousness on an otherwise ordinary drive. And you start to realize this isn't just a bedtime story. It's a mirror, and you're finally ready to look. The hum of your car grows gentler now. The highway has emptied, the world quieter, like even the night itself is leaning in, waiting for this final chapter to unfold. You ease into the drive, not because you're slowing down, but because everything feels softer, more intentional. Atlantis has traveled with you for hours now, through fact and fiction, ruins and riddles, science and symbolism, and still one question remains. What if it never needed to be found? Because maybe, just maybe, Atlantis wasn't lost. Maybe it was hidden, by choice, by design. Think of it like this. You're carrying knowledge that can't be seen on a map, that isn't stored in a museum. It's something inherent, a kind of mythic code humming quietly underneath your rational thoughts. And occasionally, on long, dark roads like this, it rises to the surface. Not as words, but as wonder. Let's get strange one last time. There are legends whispered through esoteric circles and secret schools that Atlantis didn't simply vanish, but evolved. Its greatest minds, seeing the collapse coming, chose not to fight nature, but to work with it. They scattered, not physically, but energetically. Their souls, or if you prefer, their frequencies, reincarnated. They seeded wisdom into future lifetimes, carried fragments of forgotten knowledge forward. The builders, the dreamers, the poets, the inventors who felt things no one else could name. What if you're one of them? Not metaphorically, but literally. Historians, of course, scoff. They'll say there's no evidence for that, no carbon dating, no artifacts. And they're right. Because some things can't be dug up in deserts or oceans. Some things live in dreams, in instincts, in the flicker behind your eyes when someone mentions a place that doesn't exist. And yet you swear you've been there. Want one last wild curveball? Some remote viewing experiments, the kind governments quietly funded during the Cold War, claim to have tuned into ancient Atlantean archives, buried beneath Antarctica, encoded in crystal, or humming inside dimensional storage fields. Not proof, but tantalizing. Historians still argue whether the minds involved were tapping real memories or just wishful fantasies. But maybe the distinction doesn't matter. Atlantis, like all enduring myths, exists because it needs to, because it holds something essential, something that can't be packaged or sold, something we're always in danger of forgetting, a map to what we could be. Not perfect, not invincible, but conscious, kind, aligned. You grip the wheel a little tighter, not out of tension, but respect. Because suddenly, every small moment feels monumental. Every raindrop that once flooded a continent, every story whispered down through crumbled temples, every quiet voice inside you that's ever said, there must be more than this. It was never just about finding Atlantis. It was about remembering it, in yourself, in each other, in this strange, beautiful, spinning planet we call home. So maybe it's time to stop chasing lost cities and start building new ones, wiser ones, not with lasers or levitation, but with love, with humility, with a reverence for the ancient and a boldness for the future. And when someone asks you, do you really believe in Atlantis? You can smile and say, I don't just believe in it, I remember it. The wind slows, the road evens out, and the stars above seem closer somehow. You're not alone. You never were. You're just driving home. Word count, 177. Wind down, 300 words. The engine purrs softly beneath you now, more of a whisper than a growl. Outside, the world has faded into gentle dark, the kind that doesn't feel empty, but protective, like a blanket drawn over the sky. Your breath slows, the air is cooler, and even your thoughts stretch out a little more quietly. Atlantis no longer feels like a puzzle. It feels like a lullaby. Not a warning, not a mystery, but a soft echo from a dream you almost forgot. The kind of dream you wake from with tears in your eyes and you don't know why. You see a white temple again. Feel that warm sand beneath your bare feet, the scent of salt, of cedar, laughter somewhere in the distance, a name you used to know. And then it's gone, not lost, just remembered enough. Enough to carry it forward, enough to do better this time. You blink slowly. The lines on the road blur, but that's okay. You're almost where you need to be. Not a destination, a realization that the past isn't behind you. It's beneath you, carried in your bones, whispered through your blood, waiting always for the quiet moment when you finally listen. So go ahead. Let go of the wheel for just a moment. Feel the stillness, the knowing. Atlantis is not a myth. It's a mirror. And maybe now, you're ready to look. Good night, traveler. Sweet dreams.